Hello, everyone, and welcome again to another BetTalker podcast. Today, we're really lucky to have Dr. Jeff Derevensky. I hope I have said your surname okay.
It's close.
Oh,
Derevensky.
thank you. And it's amazing to have the opportunity to have you here with us today. And for those that don't know you, would you be able to tell us a little bit about yourself and how did you end up researching in gambling and all this stuff?
Sure. So I have a doctoral degree in child and adolescent psychology. And historically, I was looking at children's toys
Okay.
and trying to understand what made toys interesting to young children. And this was the beginning of Nintendo, when
Oh,
Nintendo first developed. And so we began to look at Nintendo uh, and said, is there any other types of activities that mimic what Nintendo does based on intermittent reinforcement schedules, the interactions between the computer and the individual? And we came across gambling. And so we did some research. One of my graduate students at the time, who then became my co-director at the center for many years, Reena Gupta, we began to look at research on adolescence and gambling. And there were a few studies that had been done uh, which showed that young people were actually gambling and that they were starting to exhibit problems. But nobody was asking the question, what are the risk factors involved in youth gambling? And more importantly, how do we prevent gambling problems? And at the same time, how do we treat young people who may be experiencing gambling problems? So this goes back 35 years ago when we started developing these kinds of questions. And so for the last 3.5 decades, I've been working in the field of youth gambling, which is now very, very popular. Many, many more researchers are engaged in looking at youth gambling and some of the risk behaviors. What's interesting also from our perspective is that gambling has changed dramatically in the last 3.5 decades. So we've gone from land based gambling, where young people are mostly gambling on lottery tickets, and then they started getting involved in more regulated forms of gambling. And now we have online gambling. And if you move one step further, we've come almost round circle where we have young people who are playing loot boxes on gambling activities. So there's a real close intersection between gaming and gambling, and understanding how young people get involved or overly involved. The reality is that most young people, high school students, are actually gambling. A recent study that came out of the US shows that about 36% of children are engaged in some form of gambling. And as you get older and closer to legal age, you actually start seeing an increase in gambling behaviors. So we've been involved in trying to understand the dynamics and interaction between youth and gambling, why some people are at greater risk than others. This also led us to a variety of different studies over the years. We've worked with the National Collegiate Athletic Association. This is the organization in North America, or in the US in particular, that works with sports athletes in all the colleges throughout the United States. And so for 20 years now, every 4 years, we do a study with the NCAA looking at changing patterns of gambling behaviors, seeing whether things, most recently, whether things like advertising are impacting their gambling, whether they're doing more online gambling. And as you well know, because of sports and the way we can now gamble on sports, where you could do prop bets and have many, many bets during a game, we wanted to see whether this is impacting their perspective. We've also worked with the World Health Organization. We've also worked with the International Olympic Committee, trying to understand how individuals are engaged in gambling behaviors. We've seen some very interesting new trends that we're concerned about. And at the same time, during these last 20 odd years, I've been involved in treating young people with gambling problems. So young people would come to our center and who had a gambling problem, and we would try to look at what were the motivating factors for their gambling, how could we actually help stop their gambling, or at least curtail their gambling behaviors. So 35 years of research. We published many, many papers and done. We are now involved in social policy work. We're working with governments around the world trying to set up more effective, responsible gambling policies. And we also do a lot of training throughout the world of treatment providers as well as researchers.
Wow, it's absolutely fascinating. So many things that I want to ask you about because, I'm
Sure.
a Nintendo, generation, person. I remember, my first NES, and having Super Mario, and I remember, you know, some some things, that I'm a dad now, and I can see my son, playing Switch and all that, and I have grown, a bit uncomfortable with some features of the Super Mario games when you get at the end of the levels and you have this sort of, spinning mushroom flower life, and you need to, uh, and it's like, oh, I feel, maybe I'm because I'm working in this area, a bit sensitive to all this thing, but oh, I feel quite uncomfortable with this. Maybe somebody should give a ring to Nintendo and say, look, can we make this a different way so it's not as close as a slot machine?
Yeah, it's interesting. Many years ago, I did an interview with. We were on a TV show with the president of Nintendo and
Wow.
myself, and he was arguing that it improves all these eye-hand coordination skills in young people, that they have better processing skills, and that they can actually make better jet fighter pilots because of some of the games that they were developing at the time. And I asked the question, A, how do we know any of these skills transfer to anything else in real life? And B, how many jet fighter pilots do we really need now?
Uh,
Although I think we're starting to see more of these young people flying drones,
yeah.
and that eye-hand coordination actually probably works. But whether or not it transfers from the game to their skill set, I'm not sure.
I have really good spatial memory, and I always have attributed that to the video games, because you get like a big map in your brain, and I sort of, I don't know, I always attributed that. Okay, I never get lost because I played a lot of video games when I was a kid. Something interesting of how, because one of the things, I have worked in the gambling industry, for a few years, working in regulated industry, and normally, having seen that many young people gambling before they're 18, because you have to do KYC, check documents and all that. But I always said that the it's a bit like you wait until people are 18, and you should do the whole education beforehand, because you get young people that they actually, they're gambling, they're doing loot boxes, pay to win, microtransaction with some mechanics that, look, I have worked, in the gambling industry. If it walks like a duck and sounds like a duck, and it's likely to
It is
be,
a duck.
it is a duck. And I got in the news that I think today or yesterday that the Dutch government, they have decided that loot boxes is not gambling, and I still feel very uncomfortable with this, because okay, it may not fulfill the definition of the regulator of what's gambling, but for most effects, it feels like, and it may have an impact on creating future habits. What research says in terms of,
Yeah, I
you
mean,
know
I think you're absolutely right. And, we have a genre of games that we often also call social casino games. So these games simulate real casino type activities. And I was at an airport in Minneapolis, actually, waiting for my plane. And I was sitting having lunch at the airport, and right next to us, there was kind of a four-seat place. There was a young girl and her dad sitting there. And the young girl was playing a slot machine, a simulated slot machine on her laptop. And she was winning. And she kept saying to her dad, "Boy, isn't this great? Imagine when I'm able to gamble for real money. Look how much money I would be making." And so this becomes part of the problem. We also know that many parents are gambling with their children or allowing their children to gamble. We did a study in Nova Scotia where we found that parents were giving their credit cards to underage minors to gamble online. So one of the concerns that we have, and certainly, along the lines of BetTalker as well, is to try to raise awareness that this is not a good activity for young people to engage in. When they're older and they can make better decisions, then that may be the best idea. One of the earliest studies that we did looked at lottery scratch tickets amongst young kids. And we found in our province where I live, Quebec, Canada, that young kids were still able to buy tickets. And so we actually, our group was the group that got the law changed that made it required that you had to be at least 18 years of age in order to gamble on the lottery. So we've been working at developing research and public policy that will translate into legislative policies all throughout the world. And one of the other interesting things that we found was that parents will often buy lottery tickets, scratch tickets, as Christmas stocking stuffers or holiday gifts or birthday gifts. And so we developed a campaign, which now we had the National Council on Problem Gambling in the US join with us.
Mhm.
That's now an international campaign suggesting this is not a good activity for young people.
I wanted to ask, because this sort of thing, I think sometimes is the lack of awareness. I remember, like, many years ago, I was delivering training for one of the biggest UK gambling operators, and I was talking about type of gambling, and a scratch card that is also a type of gambling. And I saw one of the persons a bit like, and this person was the head of safer gambling. I said, okay, what's going on? Can you share? Say, oh, I just realized that, I always tell my daughter when we go to the supermarket and get a scratch card that she does it for good luck. And it's like, I don't think that's a good idea. And you get even people that they work on safer gambling that, you know, there's sometimes, that the things don't even click. And, I remember saying, oh my God, it's sometimes not the awareness. People sometimes think, okay, gambling is a casino, but there's stuff that comes before gambling, and sometimes can be some types of video games.
Yes, I mean, one of the things that we learned internationally from research done literally around the world is that one of the predictors of a future gambling problem for a child is an early big win. So what is an early big win? So if you take your daughter or son to buy a lottery ticket and they win 100 euros, for example, or $100, that may be a big win for them. To us, it would be nice, but it wouldn't make a big dent or change in our lifestyle. But for a young person, that can be something that can propel them to continue their gambling.
I'm really interested, on the intersection between gaming and gambling, and I feel sometimes, that you know you know parents should play with their kids online. When they're playing online, it's important, because maybe you can have a bit of effect, like modeling, or regulating behaviors. It's a bit like, okay, the same way that, I don't know, you teach your child, I don't know, how to play football or ride a bike, or you know hunting, if you're into that, or fishing. Okay, if you do it together, maybe there's a way to decrease risks.
Well, I think why one of the things is that we have to wait till they're of legal age in order to do that. So I wouldn't say that we should do that with our 9 or 10-year-olds
Oh, I
and show
mean,
them that we're gambling. And uh, one of the things that we do know, though, from again our research, is that young boys in particular will model their fathers. So if the fathers are gambling, then they're more likely to continue gambling as well.
I mean playing video games, not gambling.
Oh, yeah. I mean, we could play all these types of games. Uh, I will say, Pedro, you've worked in the industry as well, which is interesting. When I first started working in the field of gambling, we talked about youth gambling. The industry used to identify me as Darth Vader, the
Oh,
evil
really?
empire. Today, though, they're more likely to kind of associate me with Yoda, the little old crinkly guy. But we're able to work together now. And there are times that when I work for the industry and I do consulting with the industry, that I will say, we have to agree to disagree on some things. The gaming industry, though, is completely opposite to that. They do not want to work with researchers. They do not want to work with people who are suggesting that loot boxes are in fact a form of gambling. And this intersection between gaming and gambling is becoming more problematic. And there are in the United States a number of class action lawsuits against gaming operators, not gambling operators, but gaming operators. Uh, One of the other interesting phenomena is Frank Fahrenkopf, who was at the time president of the American Gaming Association. They called it Gaming Association, which was the industry gambling operation, said we're going to change it to gaming because gaming has no negative consequences. whereas gambling still had some of the old stereotypical problems associated with it. So we're going to change gambling operations to gaming operations. Now we have gaming, which is video gaming, using the same terminology. And so we have to be really careful when we discuss this with our children. We know that young children are really addicted to their cell phones, their smartphones, their laptops. This is the new casino right here. This is the way young people are gaming and gambling. You can't walk into a restaurant and not see a teenager who's on their cell phone doing some form of gaming. And some of these are actually simulating gambling types of activities.
Uh, it's interesting that you talk about, okay, the difficulty to do anything, on gaming, like video games, because I have tried to contact, out of curiosity, like companies and all that, and it's completely impossible to speak with anyone. It's a bit like, okay, there's an absolute wall. There's no response. I find that, I don't know, maybe because I have worked in the gambling industry, it's easier to talk to people in the gambling industry, and sometimes they may be open to discuss research or collaborate, or they may have genuine interest. uh, in some places, particularly in Europe, we've seen a bit more of a divide, particularly in the in research or in organizations that provide prevention or treatment, and in the gambling industries, this sort of thing. Okay, if you work, you know or if you collaborate in some way with the gambling industry, you're sort of tainted. What's your experience? It's similar in Canada, or it was like that and now has changed?
Yeah, I mean, actually, it turns out that Montreal is a hub for gaming companies, and yet they don't want to do any research. They don't want to do collaboration. I agree fully. I think it's becoming a real problem. And what I've always said to the gaming operators, not the gambling operators, the gaming operators, is that legislation is going to come in. And if you don't work with us to try to mitigate and minimize the harms associated, then when legislation comes in, it's going to be much more draconian and much more severe. And yet those things seem to go by the wayside. They look at me like I'm from a different planet, and really there is no harm in it. The other thing they'll say very clearly, all of them will say, it's not the games. If it's a problem, as a parent, you have to restrict your child from playing these games. It's not our opportunity. We make these games. But what's ironic is the games are being made for free. They're available for free, most of the online games. Well, where's the money coming from for the development? Clearly from loot boxes. That's what they're selling. That's how they're making hundreds of millions of dollars.
It's probably now you're the Darth Vader of the video game industry.
Yes, I think I am.
Going to make a buddy with your face, like the final boss.
Well, I once, it was interesting. I once gave a talk in Toronto to gambling and gaming industry, and I was walking across the stage throughout my talk, and an attorney who was in the audience sent me an email the next day, and said, "Jeff, why were you walking back and forth so much?" And I said, "Because it's harder to hit a moving target than if you stand still." And he said to me, he said, "Jeff, I have to say, what you said was 100% accurate. We have to become more responsible." The audience may not want to accept that right now, but we do have to become more responsible. Things are changing dramatically, especially as it relates to our young people with gaming and gambling and social media. In North America especially, although in some jurisdictions in Europe as well, gambling and gaming are now becoming a public health issue. And we really have to develop more prevention initiatives. We have developed a large number of gambling prevention initiatives that we go into schools and offer to work with the young people. And many principals and administrators in the schools and headmasters will say, we don't really have a gambling problem. But the reality is, when we say we'll come in and talk about gaming, they welcome us with open arms. Please, all our kids are having difficulty. Schools are now prohibiting young people from bringing in cell phones into the classroom because all they're doing is either gaming, pornography, gambling, etc. So there's now bans in many districts and jurisdictions around the world, whereas young people, high school students, are no longer allowed to bring in their smartphones into classes.
It's something that you know the accountability bit. So we just made the game. It's up for the parents, to be responsible for the children, and it's something that is not easy, because for example, when I mean, we're lucky in the sense that we have very like-minded parents in our group that say, okay, until the kids they're not 16 or 18, they're not having phones. But there's all the kids, that they have phones since 5 years old,
Yeah,
and it's like, okay, this can be good, and it's concerning, sometimes, okay, if you're in a group where, okay, all the kids they have phones, you probably don't want your kid to be an outcast, so it's something that it needs to be
yeah,
done at a school level, or as a group of parent level, so they don't feel left out. It's a bit like, okay, if or it should be something at country level, like, okay, so there's x amount of hours that it's okay to play video game a day, but
yeah,
more than 2 hours or 3 hours, you can't, or you need to have a, I don't know, an adult needs to sign up. I don't know, I don't think I have an answer, but I think maybe there's a way to help parents not to be on their own.
yeah. I think you're right, Pedro. I think it's really important to work with parents and get groups of parents together and to share experiences amongst the parents, how to restrict their children's use of media. It's, the World Health Organization is very, very concerned now about internet gaming disorder and trying to identify some of the risk factors and protective factors so that young people don't get overly involved. Everyone is attached to their cell phones now. It's actually quite remarkable. When my grandchildren walk into my house, the first thing they do is they get on their cell phones, and I say, "Please put your cell phones aside and let's talk." Uh, Part of that is also modeling, though. We as parents are often checking our email, we're checking our cell phones. We're checking to see our text messages. And I think there has to be some limits that we set ourselves as well.
Yeah, I mean, we cannot ask our children or grandchildren to do something that we're not doing ourselves.
Yeah. It's easy for us to say, do as I say, but not as I do, but it doesn't work that way. Um, but at the same time, young people will tell us if I don't have my cell phone, if I don't communicate, if we're not playing games with my friends, then I'll have no friends because that's what my friends do.
Hmm?
They all come in and they come into a room and they sit and play on their smartphones or on laptops. They're all playing the same game.
Hmm?
So it's young people are not going outside and playing on the streets anymore in North America. They're all on their smartphones.
Hmm. Yeah, I remember the old days when I came back from school. I take my bike. Well, the days when I was not playing my Nintendo, and I'll come back when the lampposts were on. Okay, now it's time to go back home.
Right, right. It's becoming more and more of a problem.
Yeah,
What's also raging amongst young people is sports wagering
yeah.
in North America. As more and more states legalize it and normalize it, we're seeing young people engaged in more sports wagering. The numbers of calls to helplines are dramatic, gambling helplines are dramatically increasing because of people getting overly involved in sports.
Mhm.
And historically, when I was young, and this kind of dates me a bit, but if we bet on a sport, whether it be soccer or football or basketball, whatever the sport was, we placed the bet in the beginning of the game, before the game started. We waited to the end of the match and we saw who won or who lost. But today, we've moved from a form of discontinuous gambling, where you start and end at a certain point, to continuous form of gambling. So you could bet on many things going
Mm.
through the during a game. You could bet on who's going to be ahead in the first period, who's going to be ahead in the second period. You could bet on what color blouse the captain or the quarterback's wife will wear on a particular game. There's so many different things that you can actually wager on. And so young people grow up, say, I played sports, I like sports, I watch sports, I know everything about sports. Therefore, they translate that into I can win on placing a wager. Yet we know from many recent scandals in North America about athletes trying to alter the outcome of the game because of their own gambling problems.
you
So
know
this is becoming a major, major issue.
for me, this is something is really interesting, and I think there's many levels there, because sometimes I don't know the US, but for example, in Spain with football and all that, we have a tradition of kids, they go very young, to the elite football schools and all that. And it feels sometimes that okay, you got someone alone, or even if they have the parents, they may not be there all the time, they are judged on their performance all the time. So it feels a bit like, okay, you have a young athlete that can be very vulnerable, that gambling could, they may be very vulnerable to gambling. And sometimes when you get okay, young athlete that rig a game, sometimes it's okay, maybe they're portrayed as perpetrators, where I think they may be also a victim. What are your thoughts on?
So this is another growing important area that's been neglected till fairly recently. In our recent NCAA study, the National Collegiate Athletics study, where we had 21,000 college student athletes. We found that a identifiable percentage of athletes were being threatened by outside gamblers to try to alter the game. This is also true of the International Olympic Committee, where they found that people who were gambling on individuals were being threatened, their families were being threatened, their children were being threatened in order to try to change their performance during a particular game. So this is a real growing problem. And how do we protect our athletes? How do we protect the integrity of the game? So this study that we do for the National Collegiate Athletic Association every 4 years is designed for two reasons. One, in order to help protect the mental health and well-being of the athletes. The second, we want to see about the integrity of the game. We want to see what's happening. And so when I have a sports gambler come to me for treatment and he says, I know everything about gambling and I know everything about the sports events, I know all the players, I know their history, I know who's injured. And I said, but you don't know who's trying to alter somehow the outcome because of their own gambling problem. So this is becoming a huge, huge issue that we're actually writing a paper now in terms of looking at outside influences impacting sports gambling.
Uh, I'm really interested in this area because I'm a bit worried because it feels a bit that sometimes the approach, it's a bit like the scaremongering. I don't know. I remember in the 80s when you get the uh, former drug addict, coming to talk to you to the school, and it's like,
Yeah,
hey kids, don't smoke weed because I started smoking weed and then I end up doing heroin and and then oh, where do you score that weed that he was talking about? Sometimes it's this sort of 80s war on drug approach. I feel that it's a bit of a repeat. Is there a better way for or how can we have like better outcomes and not repeat the same
yeah,
again?
I think you're right. I mean, we're trying to look at trying to educate young people on the risk factors as to when something that looks is normalized and socially acceptable can get out of hand, and what are the outcomes of those people who do get out of hand. Uh, in some ways, we have all these young people who are being educated or introduced by to individuals who had a gambling problem, like you said, with the cocaine or the heroin. What they see is that an individual can actually successfully stop their gambling problem or stop their cocaine, and they can live a normal life. And while in one sense that's a very positive thing, because one of the things we want to tell people who have a gambling problem is, yes, there is hope. Yes, you can stop. Yes, you could get your life back on hand. The second contrary point is that we're teaching people it's okay because look, short term problems will actually get resolved over time. And that's something that we have to look at. We are developing right now for the Attorney General's office in the state of Massachusetts in the US a sports gambling program or sports gambling prevention program for high school students and young college students as well.
Mm. I don't know. Sometimes I think with all this sort of thing, you should have like like the driver's license. Okay, if you want to gamble, you need to do a course and show that you understand, probability, the different risks. I mean, I'm sure that there's double switching. Okay, you can pass your exam or whatever and then still believe on luck or bad luck. I don't know. I wish I had some idea, but sometimes it feels a bit like we're just doing the same again and again, works or doesn't work.
So in my opinion, there's no magic bullet
Yeah,
that we can give individuals. There's no, little pill that says you could gamble, but you're going to do it responsibly.
yeah.
What we could do, though, is try to educate our children. And if you go on our website, for any of your listeners, which is youthgambling.com, and you look up the word prevention, you will see a variety of different prevention types of programs that we have developed over the years. And these are designed almost as a buffet approach. Some
Okay.
people might like A, some people might like B, some people might like C. Some people may like to do two or three of those different kinds of approaches. And they seem to be most effective if delivered by teachers, educators, uh, and parents. Parents have to be the people who really educate their children most often. There's a lot of research that says when I'm in trouble, who do I talk to most? First, my parents. But that's becoming more and more problematic if parents don't understand the problems associated with gambling. They now see the problems associated with gaming because
Mm,
the kids don't want to do their schoolwork. They don't
yeah.
want to talk to them. They don't want to go outside. It's gaming, 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 gaming.
Mm,
And I think we have to really try to raise awareness that gambling amongst youth can also be a problem. In fact, prevalence studies done throughout Europe, throughout North America, and in Asia as well have shown that young people have a higher prevalence of gambling problems than adults, but
mm,
they present differently. They don't lose their homes because they still live with their parents. They don't lose jobs because they're still in school. They don't lose spouses because they don't have a boyfriend or a girlfriend yet.
mm,
So they present very, very differently. But nevertheless, they develop a wide variety of problems. They often drop out of school as a result of gambling problems. They will get involved in uh, break and entry or in terms of trying to figure out other ways of getting money in order to gamble. I had a young man once come into my office. He was sent by the court system because they found out that he was stealing and that it was related to his gambling. So I said, "How do you get your money?" He said, "Cognac." I said, "Cognac? I don't really understand." He said, "I go into a liquor store with a big trench coat and I steal bottles of cognac because
okay.
cognac is quite expensive. I then go outside and I sell the cognac for money and I use that money in order to gamble." They're
Mm,
very ingenious, they're very creative in how they get money. Uh, so it becomes really, really incumbent upon us to try to develop and have better prevention programs. One of the reasons I do this podcast with you, Pedro, besides the fact I like you, is I want to raise awareness that this is an issue. We do many media talks throughout the year trying to raise awareness that parents should be looking at this, not that it only occurs occasionally, but can actually occur more often.
Uh, Jeff, I also wanted to talk to you about stigma and gambling. I find that in many occasions, or most of the occasions, uh, people they don't want to see themselves having a problem with gambling, and my impression is because the way that gamblers are portrayed is quite demeaning, or quite stereotypical, all the time. When you see an ad about someone struggling with gambling, it's okay, it's a bad parent, don't take care of their children, or they are portrayed as a maniac. And I just feel a bit, is there a way to portray people affected by gambling harm, a bit more, uh on a bit more complex and a bit more human?
Yeah, what's interesting is if a young person comes in with an alcohol problem, you could smell it on their breath. If they come in with a cocaine problem, you could see it in their eyes. Gambling, you can't tell. There's no telltale signs. If two people are walking down the street together, I can't tell which one has a gambling problem versus the other. The issue with young people is that they believe that they're impervious, that there's nothing that they can't do that they can't solve themselves. So when we have young people coming in for treatment and they say, well, I don't really think I have a gambling problem. My mother thinks I have a gambling problem. My girlfriend thinks I have a gambling problem. My friends think I have a gambling problem. I don't think I have a gambling problem. I could stop whenever I want. And I say, okay, so stop. But it's that reoccurring theme, the adrenaline rush they get when they're gambling. And they get an adrenaline rush whether they're winning or they're losing.
Mm.
And that becomes part of the problem. The stigma of a gambling problem is less so for adolescents, because when you think about a problem gambler, we typically think about a horse race player or an online gambler, a middle-aged male who's lost his family, he's lost his job, he's lost all his money. That doesn't fit a teenager.
Yeah.
And so when we have self-help groups, many self-help groups like Gamblers Anonymous, for example, when teenagers don't like to go, but when they do go, they come back to me and they say, Jeff, you know what? I'm not so bad. My gambling hasn't gotten that bad. I haven't lost my house. I haven't lost my job. And so they come away saying, things are not so bad. And that becomes another issue that psychologists and social workers and treatment providers have to really address.
It's really interesting, because it's also how you compare yourself. Okay, there's going to be someone, as you said, that they lost their house, they stole a bank, they end up in jail. Say, okay, I only haven't passed my exams. Maybe the next term will be a bit better. It's like, okay, you comparing yourself with the extreme end. You're also suffering from harm.
Exactly.
Mm. So,
Yeah.
Jeff,
But most individuals don't view themselves as problem gamblers. We actually did a research study where we gave high school students a gambling screen, and we identified problem gamblers and those who are at risk for problem gambling. And we asked the question, do you think you have a gambling problem on a Likert type scale? And those who scored high, meaning they had real strong gambling problems, said, no, I don't think I have a gambling problem. So it's the self-perception, and how do we change that? How do we reduce that kind of stigma of what a gambling problem is? One of the interesting findings that I note when we do treatment, when I go across the country in the US or in Canada and I talk to treatment providers, they all come back to me and say the same thing. How come you get kids to come in to your treatment center, but when we open our treatment centers for gambling, we can't get young people? And one of the things that I learned quickly was our treatment center is in the university. So they come in like a university type student would come in. And they will tell me very specifically, I don't want to go to that treatment center because that treatment center outside handles drugs, alcohol, gambling, and I don't want someone to think that I'm a drug addict, or I don't want
Mm,
someone to think I'm an alcoholic.
mm,
So that perception of, yeah, from young people's points of view is really, really important to keep in mind. Uh, you know, many groups, the group in the UK, for example, they don't have a whole lot of young people coming to them for treatment.
mm,
But at the same time, they're now developing work on gaming, and they're trying to integrate the gaming and the gambling operation into the National Health Service.
mm. I think it makes complete sense. Jeffrey, it has been an absolute pleasure, to have you here in the podcast, and I hope to see you soon at a conference somewhere.
It's my pleasure, Pedro.
Thank you.
Keep up the good work.